Great. So, obviously, we are very worried because we are fully aware that it is us three standing between you and lunch time. But Niinami-san, what time is it?
Suntory time. Yeah. Kathy, where's Kathy? I did it. Perfect.
But it's wrong. Niinami-san, you are one of Prime Minister Abe's most intimate advisors. You've been with Prime Minister Abe. You know, Niinami-san is only one of two private sector people who's been advising Prime Minister Abe on concrete business projects, for the last 6 years. You've been there right from the beginning. So your answer is not supposed to be Suntory time, it's supposed to be Abenomics time. But, in all seriousness, I mean, we're supposed to have a little fun, right? No fun, no good business, right? But, obviously, Abenomics, 6 years now, going strong. And then we've got Trumpnomics. All of a sudden, America has become the uncertain part in the partnership here. But, at the outset, Niinami-san, if I may start with you, impact of Abenomics, impact of Trumpnomics on your business. Could you just highlight a couple of things?
Well, first of all, I just want to review what happened since Prime Minister Abe took the office 6 years ago. Well, take a look at what was going on 6 years ago. First of all, almost a full employment.
Right.
And more women, more elderly people are working. And we got out of deflation, not completely. There's inertia still. So that means, and we got potential economic growth around 1% from a negative.
Right.
So pretty good. He's done a really good job. Whereas we have the big anxiety, which is healthcare and the social welfare system. We have to revamp, we have to change the entire system for the better of the younger generations and the working generation like me.
Right.
So that's the missing point we have to address. I mean, and I urged many times, but it requires to convince vested interest.
Right.
It's a hard job for him to proceed. And going to the Mr. Trump, President of the United States, as a Suntory, we export bourbon from Kentucky to Europe, to China. We are so much affected thanks to the tariff retaliation from Europe. We have to pay 25% over the current pricing. So which means we have to take price someday, somehow in Europe. We will lose the share and we will lose the efficiency, and China.
Right.
So I hope President Trump do not hurt allied nations like us. And going back to Prime Minister Abe, we have to get rid of the anxiety to the future of the working generations, because we are still in the mind of the deflation.
Right. Right.
So that's a sticking point of
it's actually very interesting because you're absolutely right, and I think Sachin, you would agree. I mean, things have turned around. The Japanese economy is growing, but people are not spending. If you actually look at the data, since the start of Abenomics, you have had household incomes growing by about 26 trillion yen, but consumption expenditure was only growing by about 13 trillion yen. So all of a sudden, the Japanese are back to what they always do, which is save a lot. And I think the anxiety over the future of the healthcare system, is a huge block, right, that keeps the money stored, right, in cash. Now, Sachin, you run a very successful insurance business here in Japan. In fact, your company is as old as the Meiji Restoration, right? 150 years. Now, you've been the CEO here in Japan for almost a decade. And you're now also, since this year, the head of the American Chamber of Commerce. Abenomics, Trumpnomics, your take.
I think very similar to Niinami-san's comments. I think in both cases, Abenomics obviously has a longer runway and a better track record. They're fundamentally what I call pro-growth type policies. And the idea is to really reinforce economic growth and reinforce the business community's role in the economic environment there. On Abenomics, I think the actions that have been taken clearly have had impact, as Niinami-san said here. But there is more to do.
Right.
And I think the overhang in Japanese consumer sentiment is a really important issue that needs to get tackled going forward. And from an insurance perspective, it's something that we spend a lot of time researching here in Japan. Japanese consumers have two very big worries. Right? One is they all know they're going to live longer, but they're worried about outliving their retirement, and they're worried about a quality of life or unhealthiness in retirement. And those two things, I think, to the point around the data, are really forcing people, even in an economic growth environment or a pro-growth environment where you have ultra-low unemployment,
Right.
You have people wanting to save more.
Right.
Because they're still worried.
Right.
And so that overhang is an important issue, as Niinami-san said, and I know you're working very closely with the Prime Minister and the government on this, has to get solved in order to, I think, create more of the virtuous cycle that's been put in place, but still there's a bit of a break effect on here. So good progress, I think definitely a turnaround that a lot of people 5-6 years ago would have bet would not have happened.
Yep.
And so I think that's a real positive statement on what Abenomics has been able to accomplish here. On the President Trump side, I'd say the same thing. From a business perspective, it's been a very pro-growth environment, from corporate tax reform to deregulation. And I'd even say on the trade agenda side, I think the intent of the trade agenda to get to more free, fair, reciprocal trade is ultimately a growth agenda there. And I think the key watch point there would be making sure that we do no harm first.
Right.
And that we then very quickly get focused around actionable areas so that we can create certainty, because certainty for CEOs is fundamental to deploying capital.
Right.
And when we can't have certainty, we tend to become a bit more reserved about both investments that we're making, but importantly also raising our wage base. And those are, again, important issues to think through here as both governments look to create sustained economic growth, sustained capital investment, as well as sustained wage growth are going to be fundamental to that. And so I think there's opportunities in both areas, Abenomics and Trumponomics, to build on the early momentum, but also then take some further bolder action going forward.
Niinami-san, if I may, so great. There is success, here in Japan, Abenomics. Where is it? That third error that we are all waiting for. I mean, you mentioned healthcare reform, but, what is, you mentioned a little bit the vested interest, and there's no media in the room, right? This is off the record. The deregulation agenda, what is close to your heart?
Good question.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
We discussed it beforehand.
Just, would you like some whiskey?
All right.
Maybe we should.
First of all, some arrows. The first one is finance. The second, fiscal. The third, definitely deregulation. I think please take a look at people from abroad. More people. You can take a look at Lawson, for example. I mean, it's a very intimate convenience store for me. And, we allowed lots of people to come over here by easing the visa issuance, for example. And plus, at the rice party, you see lots of people working from abroad. And second thing is more women and more elderly people are working. And we call M curve.
Right.
Almost similar, or maybe better than that of the US.
Right.
So that's a huge change, though people tend to take it for granted, but it's a huge effort. But three things. One, what about the immigration? What to do with the birth rate? What to do with the people from abroad to increase? To stop the decrease in population. that part, we are now discussing the diet, what to do with the people from abroad, especially low-skilled labor. We discussed the high-skilled, but it's not been so successful to attract high-skilled laborers to this country. Whereas we need people to nursing homes, child care. It's on the way, and we will pass. We means people. The government will pass the bill. But so that is coming underway. Second, mobility of people, laborers. What to do with the people who are willing to change jobs, but the entire system is more or less to let people stay instead of moving to another opportunity. I think definitely that's what we have to tackle, which means what to do with the people, mobility. The third is healthcare.
Right.
There's a huge power of the Nursing Association in Japan, Doctors Association in Japan, and so LDP's issue is how to tackle with the vested interest.
Right.
And that's the part. Two things we have to do right away.
Right.
Again, we don't call immigration no media, right?
No media, absolutely not.
That's immigration, I believe, what we are talking about. But skilled laborers or to be skilled, both are very important. Instead of just bringing people with no skill, any aspiration to have skill in the future. Right. So that's a huge difference.
Sachin, maybe from your vantage as the head of the American Chamber of Commerce here in Japan, what do you hear? What's the biggest obstacle? What's the biggest wish that your member companies have? What is the agenda they would like to see implemented?
I think building on Niinami-san's points, we have put together this year a council of our American Fortune 500 company CEOs that are operating in Japan. And we've been meeting with that council, and labor reform has been high on their list, and labor market reform overall. I think, the movement and the changes made with the July passage in the diet were a good first step. There's a lot more opportunity there for continued mobility of the workforce, and in essence, creating an environment where we begin to tap younger generation a lot more. The current system, I think we can all say, has lots of opportunities for improvement. One of them that is, it tends to, I think, take away motivation for younger Japanese people. And irrespective of population decline, I think any market in which the younger generation is not motivated to take risk, to create mobility in their careers, ultimately not long-term good here. And so I put labor market reform as a key discussion topic that we've had with our Fortune 500 company CEOs here. The second has been healthcare reform. And I'll just give an interesting point on this here, just to talk about healthcare reform or the welfare reform. It's not just about the healthcare industries per se here. I had the CEO of an American company who operates in defense and aerospace come up to me after the meeting and said, look, this doesn't directly impact me, but it really does. Because if Japan cannot deal with the fiscal challenge of their social welfare system, they ultimately are going to have to cut other aspects of where they're investing, which will impact me. And so I want to help in any way I can in getting the social welfare system issues tackled, because while they don't directly impact me, they really do impact me here. And so I think for business community writ large, irrespective of the industry you're in, this is an existential issue in terms of how we think about the future.
Right. Now, let's go and start with labor, right? All of you, everybody is an entrepreneur, everybody, works in a company. Empowering the young. Now, Niinami-san, at your company, is it thinkable that a 38-year-old is actually the head, or is actually bucho, is actually the head of a division where the average age is 45? Do you actually empower people on the basis of performance and skill, or is it still strictly seniority? Sorry, I'm very personal.
Always, you're challenging me, and you know my answer.
Yes, have some Suntory.
Well, Yes, on average, general manager's age is around 45. That's true. But we are trying to rejuvenate, especially senior executives. But I guess those who are willing to be doing more are sent to the U.S. entity or European, Asian, so that they just find their motivation in overseas assignments.
Right.
Because Suntory has been 120 years in this country. We've been changing, but it's not a one-night thing. I mean, Rome is not built overnight.
Right.
We are working, but we don't want to lose motivation of those younger generations. So we provide the opportunity overseas.
Excellent. Right. Yeah. Now, Seika, pay for performance, right? Now, I assume you have pay for performance. Is it working?
I think it's very much working. It's taken us a bit of a journey to get here. We implemented pay for performance in 2011, soon after we bought our company here. We made a $10 billion acquisition to come into Japan, but really try to find the right blend of, I'll call it global best practices, focus around productivity, but also respecting where we could the Japanese culture. And it was a journey, but I think we're now able to do things that we weren't able to do before, and this really gets to the earlier question. With pay for performance and the performance ranking systems that underlie that, over time what that does is it allows you to more clearly see who are your performers at all levels in the company, at all ages in the company here, and begin to do more deliberate HR things in moving them around and creating a situation where a 38-year-old can be the bucho in a department where the average age might be 45 here. Without that, you don't really have the mechanism in a traditional Japanese HR system to really know how do you move the right younger talent into place and ensure a higher probability of success. Because in a hierarchical system, the success is simply based on years on the job.
Right.
Moving in somebody younger is obviously a riskier move, and so you need to have some performance view of that individual to give you the confidence that there's going to be a win-win for that employee and their career and for the company in making that move here. And so pay for performance and the underlying performance ranking systems, I think, are fundamental to beginning to create that, I'll call it healthy rotation.
Right.
That's very much needed certainly in our company here. The same would be true around women. We've put a lot more women into management over the last several years. We've doubled our rate of women executives. We've almost doubled our rate of women managers as well in our company over the last 4 or 5 years. Same thing. We had women who everybody kind of knew were good performers, but without a performance ranking system, without the pay for performance, you don't really know who your talent is, whether it's male or female. And by now having a clear sense of capability, you're able to also promote and take risks with females that you wouldn't otherwise take or let unconscious bias take over here. So I think these systems, while they are challenging to implement, they take a bit of persistence and vigilance and push from the top. They're fundamental to getting that healthy rotation, that productivity improvement, and then that diversity. And the diversity and productivity are really kind of correlated there. So it's been a good journey, and I say we're still on it.
Yeah, Niinami-san, you've had so many very powerful experiences. I mean, you were the CEO before your current position. You revolutionized the convenience store, right? With Lawson. Now that is a Japanese company. This is the belly of the beast, so to speak, right? How did you deal with, HR, empowerment, pay for performance? What was your experience?
I just got rid of a seniority system.
Right.
Because consumers don't care. And convenience store has to be an agent of consumers, not the manufacturers like Suntory. And we have to put the value, definitely, always closer to consumers. So, and plus talented people can be promoted. That's very simple. Otherwise, we can't compete with the consumers.
Right.
So that's crystal clear.
Right.
So that's why I did, and brought the people from abroad too.
Right.
So diversity means a lot for innovation. So I experienced it, though it was a long journey. And plus, recruited more than 51% from female students and
Right.
mid-career too. So the value of diversity is needed to this society and can be fit. But considering the manufacturing companies like us, teamwork is very important. So how to balance between pay for performance and the teamwork value, it's always a struggle. And for example, to make one brand viable takes 10, 15 years. So that needs the tenacious effort to make. So, and that is a total, teamwork. So it's very hard to find who did a great job.
Right.
But instead, just praise the teamwork and the manager and other people. I think manufacturing has a maybe different idea about how to go with the pay for performance.
Right, right. I mean, it's very interesting, because, the word that keeps on coming back is focus on the young, empowering the youth. I mean, as some of you know, I do want to be reborn as a 23-year-old Japanese and be hired by both of you, right, as a female.
Real diversity.
Yeah. Real diversity, yes. No, but and it actually is your solution to the healthcare and fiscal problem. I mean, if you want a functioning healthcare and fiscal system, just make sure that your children earn twice as much as you do, and you're fine, right? Now, obviously, the productivity needs to be that. Now, changing tack, right? It's entrepreneurship. There's lots of opportunities in Japan. There's lots of opportunities in US-Japan relations. If you two take off your hat and come back as a 25-year-old, right, entrepreneur, what area of Japan, right, or what area of US-Japan business would you invest in? Where would your startup be?
This is a very exciting topic, and one where the American Chamber here has also been putting a lot of energy into this, and we have quite a few entrepreneurial and startup companies that make up our membership that have been really talking about how Japan can present exciting opportunities, and there are lots of exciting opportunities. I'd say a couple things. One, the opportunities of the future and the entrepreneurial space are cross-industry, cross-sectoral. Most importantly. So what do I mean by that? We can think about auto industry as traditionally making cars, or we could think about what's happening to the auto industry in terms of the disruption in driverless cars. There's tremendous opportunities in that space for startups and bringing together technology and traditional cars. There's also tremendous opportunity there of redefining what's auto insurance. When you have a driverless car, who's buying the insurance? And who's at fault? So there's tremendous opportunity when we think about cross-industry and auto, or importantly, healthcare. And not just traditional healthcare, but bringing together big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and also thinking through very differently how we fund it, and thinking about the funding mechanism as not simply being only the government, but bringing in both public, private, and government funding into the mix here. This area also has tremendous opportunity for entrepreneurial spaces here. And then finally, I'd say energy. I think Japan, very much behind some of the agenda that Niinami-san's focused on. I would assume energy agenda is very much at the top there as well. And the energy industry as well is going through tremendous disruption here, both driven by technology as well as what's historically happened here in Japan. And that's where we're seeing, as an American Chamber, a lot of our new member companies coming in, and a lot of our new member interest is in these cross-sectoral spaces here, and they really point to, I think, where the future economic growth is going to come from.
Yeah, no, this is so exciting. That's really why you do want to be a 23-year-old, right? Because, it's no longer, the car industry, right? It's, connecting the dots, right? Disruption However, it's a bit of a dirty word in Japanese, right?
Well,
Now, where do you put your money? Where's your startup?
as Sachin touched upon, definitely healthcare and health. And if I could, I want to do it. Right, even I'm not 25 years old, 59 years old, I want to start off the startups, just like
Let's do it.
Yeah, and fund is now available. 20, 30 years ago, fund was not available in this country. And there's a huge moment that a lot of people promote startups and entrepreneurial enterprises. So I want to bridge between US such as Silicon Valley or Boston to Japan, because we have a huge big data, for example. For example, at Suntory, we have the health check data and all the diagnosis, put them together. And for the sake of the healthy longevity of our employees, we can make use of disruptive technology from Boston, from Silicon Valley, mostly Silicon Valley, to make it viable to the solution of health and healthcare in this country, and not relying on the government too much. And I think such as genomic analysis for the cancer, early detection, and diabetics, and heart disease, high blood pressure, and diabetes. So we can resolve those social issues before the baby boomers graduated from 75 years old. Yeah. So if we can make it happen, I think that will be a booming business in this country, as well as that helps the pocket of the national government. So I think definitely we have to work together, though I'm not 25 years old.
I want to really reinforce what Niinami-san said. And I think the healthcare challenge that Japan has, in many ways, every other developed country is going to go through this challenge. Right. Some to equal degree and some to varying degrees. And so the concept of entrepreneurialism in this space is really Japan not only solving its own problem, but helping the world figure out the path forward on an issue that's going to be broadly societal, not just limited to Japan. So it is, to me, quite an exciting space, both for the Japanese government, but from an entrepreneurial perspective.
No, and this is where the U.S.
Oh,
no.
Well, I like it. And we can talk about this applied to China sooner or later.
Absolutely.
Right? So we can create this business model by U.S. and Japan and transfer to the China, because China sooner or later, they will be suffered from aging population quite a lot. So I think this is the business model we should build.
No, this is the exciting part, right? I mean, setting the global standard, right? Japan is the laboratory, connecting the dots, right? And, bringing, US skill sets to Japanese skill sets. And I do think, that, whether it's due to Abenomics, whether it's due to the demographics changes, Japanese business leaders are now more open. Right? Business as usual is not an option, right? Corporate spin-offs, inside corporate entrepreneurship, right, is actually happening. A lot of companies have set up their in-house venture capital funds, right? So there's a great opportunity set that is actually coming through. Now, finally, Niinami-san, put you on the spot again. You have 1 minute with Prime Minister Abe and 1 minute with President Trump. What do you tell them to do? And be your best samurai, chop heads off.
Okay, so President Trump, two things. One, where is America's values? Democracy, human rights, and mostly, where is the value of diversity? That's what, President Trump revisited the value. Sorry to say that. And second thing is, again, let him join. Please rejoin the TPP, changing its name, Trump Pacific Partnership, or Trump Initiative,
right?
Whatever. Let's change the name anyway.
He can get the branding.
That's right. And Prime Minister, I spoke about, but definitely mobility of labors.
Right.
So what to do with? Because the government is talking about to raise the mandatory retirement age to 70. It's absurd. Should be 45 to 50. Because the people live much longer, so people should think about the second life, right? So I think that's what Prime Minister think about instead of extending to 70.
Good. Sachin.
So I think starting with President Trump, first, prioritize a healthy bilateral relationship with Japan. And underneath that, do no harm as a starting point, and then let's get focused on some actionable outcomes together. On the Prime Minister's side, I'd say the same thing. Prioritize a healthy bilateral relationship, and let's get focused on actionable progress between the U.S. and Japan. These are critical relationships. 30% of the world's GDP is between these two countries, and also really pivotal to the whole Asia geographic sphere here. So making sure that the U.S.-Japan relationship is front and center for both with a do-no-harm starting point.
Wonderful. So what's the takeaway? You can please discuss this over lunch. From my perspective, it's number one, empower the young. Number two, become an entrepreneur. And number three, don't meet with Mr. Trump. Thank you very much.